going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of UFC action. We return to the UFC Apex this week for UFC Vegas 72, headlined by Ricky Simón versus Yadong Song at bantamweight for now a 5-round potential main event. It was supposed to be Renato Moicano versus Arman Tsarukyan, but with Moicano pulling out, they moved last week's co-main event into this week's main event at 135. Two very exciting and talented ranked contenders at 135, Ricky Simón and Yadong Song. Should be fireworks. Altogether, this fight card did suffer a lot of canceled bouts and short notice change-ups. We now have 5 debuting fighters across 4 fights out of this 12-fight card. So this should be a shorter breakdown than normal. We should be able to breeze through this one pretty quickly, just because we've got limited data on some of the newer fighters. Some matchups are pretty cut and dry in my opinion, but I do like a lot of the money lines. I've got 4 money lines and I think 1 parlay as well already placed. I'm liking where the lines have been moving to this week, surprisingly. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some props that have dropped already. But return to this channel on Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Central Time. I'll be doing my weekly live stream, talking more betting action with my guest, formerly known as Wiz Bets, who you've seen on this channel, now goes by Wiz Does, because this guy is doing nonstop fighter interviews. He shows up to the PFL conferences, and he's still slanging out some of the best betting content on his channel, Wiz Does, and he's on Twitter as well, giving out bets on all sports. So I can't wait to talk to my guy Wiz. It's been a while, and that'll be at 10 p.m. Central Time this Wednesday. So check us out there, go into the fights in further detail, and talk more props on that show. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's break into the first prelim of the night. First fight of the night is at women's bantamweight. We've got 2 debuting fighters. Finally, hopefully, we get to see Haley Cowan make her debut as she takes on Jamie Lynn Horth, who is the former LFA flyweight champion. But this fight is at 135, and Haley Cowan, 31 years old, pretty big for the weight class at 5'8". She is a 7-2 professional, coming off of the successful Dana White Contender Series split decision win that she edged out over the grappler Claudia Leite. Something about Dana White's view of this girl and her past hype as a D1 athlete in gymnastics. I think he's trying to form like a female Bo Nickel or something like that as a prospect here. And she's on a 2-fight winning streak, but it was not the best performance on the Contender Series. She was able to show some pretty good textbook striking at range. Her 1-2 southpaw head kick is not bad. She's got some fast strikes and some pretty good takedown defense. But, she can get reversed. On the cage, she just tends to stalemate girls with her strength and size. And, owing to her D1 gymnastic past, she probably has some of that good strength, balance, and stability, able to hold her opponents against the cage, throw knees and things like that to stay active and not get it broken up by the ref. But that's really been her go-to in a lot of the fights that I've seen. Her kryptonite is really on the ground. If she ends up going for a takedown, she can be reversed, held down. Her get-up game is not that great, and she does give up her back. And she's been submitted a couple of times, once in one of her first few fights against former UFC fighter Victoria Leonardo, and then again recently against Kelly Clayton. She got basically club and subbed. Her kick got countered. She got hit by a right cross, I believe, and then Kelly Clayton jumped on a guillotine and got her out of there round 1. So otherwise, I feel like a lot of the parts of her game are coming along nicely, but she's not the most active striker. Really, it's the cage clinch that she tends to do the most work in. Now, Jamie Lynn Horth, she's a very good fighter, a well-rounded fighter. She's been a professional for longer, even though she has a 5-0 record. So a couple fights less than Haley Cowan, but I think the 5 fighters that she beat are actually more impressive opponents than the resume of Haley Cowan. And we're looking at a 100% finish rate, too, so she's a very dangerous fighter, is Horth. She's got 3 knockouts and 2 submissions, both by rear naked choke. Also a 3-0 amateur record where she beat Lupi Godinez a couple of times a few years back. So she is a pretty big girl for the weight class at 125, 5'7". She is 33 years old, so I don't think that that's going to be too big of a jump going up 10 pounds. She has usually been the bigger fighter in her bouts. A former Muay Thai fighter, or Muay Thai base at least, with a good submission game. When she can get the fight to the mat, not a bad wrestler. And she does have some very good anti-cage wrestling skills as well. I've seen her try to get held against the cage by her opponents. She's good at circling off and being very strong and having good cardio down the stretch of a fight. Like if she can overwhelm her opponents, she can jump on them, get them to the mat, and break them with ground and pound and eventually flatten them out for the rear naked choke. So I could see her exploiting that part of the weakness for Haley Cowan, which, Haley Cowan's newer to mixed martial arts, and usually the grappling takes much longer to develop than the striking. So would make sense there. That might be a sneaky look in this fight, looking for Jamie Lynn Horth by submission. But ultimately, I will take her to win this fight. She's, I believe she opened up as an underdog. She's now a slight favorite, minus 125 for Jamie Lynn Horth. Minus 105 for Haley Cowan. So we can give the size, the strength, athleticism, probably even just being a couple years younger, but much younger in the sport of mixed martial arts, probably more room to improve. That goes in the column of Haley Cowan. But as far as like being a developed striker, having prolonged output, good fight cardio, just the proven ability to persevere through hard parts of a fight, I give all of that to Jamie Lynn Horth, who's the much more dangerous fighter, both on the mat and standing, in my opinion. So I'm going to pick her to win this fight. I know she opened up as an underdog here, a sizable one, but now she's a minus 125 slight favorite. Minus 105 can be had on Haley Cowan. If I had to bet this fight, and I haven't done it yet, I would bet on Jamie Horth, just a small shot on her money line, but I would see her winning this fight by decision or submission. Another bantamweight bout up next between Brian Kelleher and Journey Newson. And right off the bat, the money line movement has confused me a bit, but I do like the way it's headed. We had Brian Kelleher around a minus 170 favorite to Journey Newson around the weekend. Now, in the past day, it's moved down on BetOnline to minus 135 for Brian Kelleher, about a plus 115 underdog price tag on Journey Newson. Most other books still have Brian Kelleher around minus 150, but I don't get any love for Journey Newson in this fight. It's a bantamweight fight. We've seen Brian Kelleher fight much larger opponents, several fights at featherweight, and the only opponents that Brian Kelleher is losing to are, pretty much ranked opponents. And he's had a long UFC career spanning back before 2017, I believe. He's 36 years old now, but I don't expect he's fallen too much off of a cliff. Kelleher's got a very well-rounded game plan of, using powerful striking at range, getting on the inside with short hooks and big overhands, usually being the, the smaller opponent. Now he'll be actually 1 inch taller than Journey Newson, who's 5'5". So that goes in his favor. This is back down at bantamweight, where he usually does better work. So that goes in his favor. And we've seen Journey Newson, really struggle with the wrestling game plan that Brian Kelleher is known to employ. So that also goes in his favor here. Newson is a very early explosive fighter, good counter striker on the outside, looks for the big 1-2. He's got a Taekwondo base and foundation style, so nice lead kicks, to all targets pretty fast. Doesn't telegraph them that much. But, Journey Newson is coming off of a 3-round decision loss to Sergey Morozov, who is more of a grappler, was able to just stifle the output of Newson, take him to the mat, or at least, have back control time for most of the fight. Really wasn't dominant until round 3, but Newson lost that fight. We're looking at a couple of other losses for Journey Newson in his career. Randy Costa knocked him out by a head kick in round 1. That happens. Ricardo Ramos in his debut was able to, again, edge out the decision based on the grappling, mostly in rounds 1 and rounds 3. And probably the best moment that Journey Newson's had in the UFC is that big, that big right hand that he got over Domingo Pilarte, but that got overturned to a no contest just for a failed marijuana, drug test. So I'll give him that one. But other than that, he beat Fernie Garcia a couple fights ago last May. Again, Fernie Garcia is more of a one-dimensional boxer, and he was able to out-decision him. But I'm just not too impressed with anything from Journey Newson. Like, the guy is powerful, but you look at the durability of Brian Kelleher, a guy who in a long career of, we're looking at, 38 fights professionally? He's only been knocked out one time, and that was to John Lineker. And I don't know if you've heard of John Lineker, but the guy's pretty powerful at the weight class. And it took Lineker until round 3 to knock out Brian Kelleher. So unless you're a top guy, like the last few guys that have beat Brian Kelleher, he's coming off of back-to-back losses. Maybe that's why this money line is a bit lower on him. But it was to Mario Batista by round 1 rear naked choke and Umar Nurmagomedov by the same method. So 2 guys you can really forgive the losses to. Before that, Brian Kelleher beat Kevin Kroom, who outsized him, as well as Domingo Pilarte in a very dominant decision for both of those bigger opponents at featherweight. So, I'm sorry, the Domingo Pilarte fight was at bantamweight. But before that, Ricky Simone, Cody Stamen, Montel Jackson, these guys are the ones that are beating Brian Kelleher. These are all guys that are ranked opponents, basically. So Journey Newson, that level of opponent, usually is somebody that Brian Kelleher can beat in either dominant decision or inside the distance. So At minus 135, I had to take the stab on his money line. I think he gets the job done here, out-wrestles Journey Newson, and also just lands better on the feet as well. So unless this stayed primarily at striking distance and Brian Kelleher has really fallen off of a cliff and regressed at 36, that's when I would see Journey Newson having a chance here. But he would have to land devastating strikes that, visibly damage Kelleher in at least 2 of 3 rounds and also stuff all the takedowns. I don't see that happening. Brian Kelleher makes very few mistakes on the mat, pretty good top pressure and ground and pound. So give me Brian Kelleher pretty confidently here. And again, you got to remember, even though Kelleher is 36 years old, has a lot of fight miles, Journey Newsom's 34, so not that much younger. So give me Kelleher to win here. Moving back to women's bantamweight, we've got Stephanie Egger, who is returning to take on a debuting fighter, a Russian girl named Irina Alekseeva. And this is a very odd matchup for a lot of reasons. But starting with Stephanie Egger, she is a Swiss fighter who's a very good grappler, world-level judo fighter. She's a very good submission grappler as well. And that shows in her fights. Her fights rarely go to decision, win or lose. Only her debut in the UFC against Tracy Cortez, where she was out-grappled, was the only one that actually saw the scorecards. Otherwise, she scored a round 2 ground and pound via elbow victory over Shayna Young. Pretty brutal there. Very nice judo head and arm throw into an armbar over Jessica Rose Clark last year. A round 1 armbar loss to Mayra Bueno Silva. And then most recently in September, she got that round 2 rear naked choke over the debuting Eileen Perez. So the problem with Stephanie Egger is the fact that her striking is not technical, fast, or, there's not enough output on that to really score in a fight where she's not the better grappler. So if you can shut down her takedown offense, be the better grappler like Mayra Bueno Silva was, or Tracy Cortez, you can probably beat her. And I don't think Stephanie Egger has much of a ceiling in this division unless she can keep on, just getting head and arm throws and scoring submissions. That's possible. Irina Alekseeva, though, this girl is 4-1 as a pro. The last time we ever saw her fight was in the Bellator card that was in Russia back in October of 2021. So quite a long layoff. She is 32 years old, and she's pretty big for bantamweight, and that's usually how she's gotten by so far, going 4-1. In fact, that last fight in Bellator I just spoke of, she fought Stephanie Page, who's a French striker. It looked like they were in 2 different weight classes, and that's the only reason Alekseeva was able to win. She was able to bully her in the clinch against the cage, and in rounds 2 and 3 actually scored some really sloppy trip takedowns and, threatened with chokes that didn't work, and really just hold position there. But at striking distance, this woman just flails around, really no technique or substance to her striking at all, and that's in most of the fights I watched of her. So it was very shocking to see that this girl's going to be in the UFC and called a UFC fighter. I see a big overlapping skill set in the favor of Stephanie Egger here, who should be the better grappler, even probably the better striker if she wanted to test that part of her game. But just get the head and arm throw, rip Alekseeva to the ground, get an armbar, and call it a day. The round 1 submission I could see is the most likely path to victory, but I wouldn't leave that ground and pound off the table for a TKO stoppage. But, Stephanie Egger, Irina Alekseeva, fight doesn't go to decisions like plus 100 or more. The under 2.5 is around plus 135, plus 145 at this point. I like both of those. The cat's kind of out of the bag with Stephanie Egger's win condition usually being her submission. That's at about plus 250. But I wonder if on DraftKings, when the same game parlays come out later in the week, if you could get like Stephanie Egger to win, get her to win, within 1 or 2 rounds, get a takedown on there, and then, inside the distance or something like that, and just parlay all of those for a better line than plus 250, which is on BetOnline by submission. So pretty confident in Stephanie Egger. It's odd that you get to see Stephanie Egger as a minus 300 or more favorite over anybody, but this is certainly the spot for her to be that. So confident in her to win. I would just take the unders to be safest, or Stephanie Egger inside the distance. Welterweight bout up next between Josh Quinlan and Trey Waters. And Trey Waters is making his very short notice debut, filling in for Ange Lusa against Josh Quinlan here. So Josh Quinlan making just his second walk to the UFC cage. So a couple of newcomers here at 170. Trey Waters just coming off of a short notice turnaround. In the LFA, he secured a title victory for the 170-pound vacant belt. That was on April 14th, so not that long ago. He knocked out Jalen Fuller after possibly losing round 1 and certainly being touched up and wobbled in round 2, but came back with a nice right cross victory. This guy is large for the welterweight division. 6'4" or 6'5", somewhere in that range with a very long reach. Only 28 years old for Trey Waters, who's 7-1 as a professional. And you might remember him from the Dana White Contender Series fight against Gabriel Bonfim, his only professional loss last season. And that was by, I think, round 1 Von Flue choke after he was touched up quite a bit. So somebody as good as Gabriel Bonfim was able to kind of exploit the holes defensively in the game of Trey Waters, and Bonfim was a pretty large welterweight as well. Trey Waters is used to being the bigger man at such a big height. He uses that tall man defense, keeps his hands rather low, his chin up in the air, uses kicks and long-range weapons to maintain distance, and just assumes that people will never be able to touch his chin, but it leaves him very susceptible to getting hit, and his defense could certainly be tightened up, especially when you're taking on a guy like Josh Quinlan, who's a pretty large welterweight as well, 6 foot tall. He's got very muscled frame. He's trained in the Wanderlei fight team in Las Vegas in the past, and really, if you look at him, he fights a very similar style to Wanderlei Silva. A pretty high guard, very aggressive Muay Thai style, good knees, and very vicious hooks up close in the pocket. And he just came off of that round 1 devastating knockout just halfway through that round against Jason Witt. Kind of a tailor-made opponent for him, but it was also a test of Josh Quinlan's takedown defense. He got taken down once in that fight, but got right back up to his feet, out to distance, and then landed that left hook that flatlined Jason Witt. And he's got a 6-0 professional record, 1 no contest, but that no contest was on the Contender Series a couple years ago. Also a devastating round 1 knockout. This guy's hand speed is vicious. Even his jumping knees are vicious as well. As an amateur, he had a 6-0 record. 5 of those were knockouts. So this guy, out of his 6-0 record and his 1 no contest, they were all finishes, 5 knockouts, 2 submissions. And the guy has faced adversity a couple of times in the regionals. I saw him get pretty well chinned by punches, also by knees, maintain distance, composure, and then also come back and get the victory later in that fight. So his cardio is not bad. If there's one knock in this guy, it's going to be that his anti-wrestling is not the best. But until somebody exposes that, I don't think it's going to be Trey Waters. I think he's going to knock Trey Waters out, quite frankly. And at minus 150 is where he opened up on BetOnline. I had to put a couple of units on him. I might even look at the inside the distance for Josh Quinlan as well. He's since moved to a minus 180 favorite, but I think this is another good matchup to get the job done. His last opponent he was supposed to take on was Lima. That would have been a little bit tougher because we've seen how durable Lima is and how well-rounded he is. But Trey Waters, I think, is still pretty green. Not the best resume of opponents. So give me Josh Quinlan to get another round 1 knockout. Up next at flyweight, a very fun clash of styles and potentially a grudge match here between Cody Durden and Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson, we've seen he's been very active in the UFC, coming off of the close split decision loss to Ode Osborne on short notice at a catchweight bout of 130. Before that, it was a round 1 TKO over Jimmy Flick, who was returning. So a couple of guys that both of these fighters have faced in common. Carlos Mota, that was Cody Durden's last dominant decision win. And Charles Johnson also fought him for the title in the LFA, finished him in round 5. Another common opponent that they both lost to was Mohamed Makayev. Pretty much club and subbed Cody Durden and then dominated over 3 rounds of grappling Charles Johnson. And they both fought Jimmy Flick. Cody Durden was able to actually get flying triangled by him in Jimmy Flick's last impressive performance. He had a long layoff, retired, came back, and then Charles Johnson took on, maybe a lesser motivated, lesser primed version of him and was able to finish him in round 1. So there's just a few of those flyweight opponents they have in common. Similar results, I would say, aside from Jimmy Flick, but different circumstances. As far as the matchup goes, they match up very well. The wrestler, of course, of Cody Durden, relentless takedown threat, but limited striking, although it's been powerful in the past. Charles Johnson, more of a loose creative striker with some submission skills as well. The southpaw in Cody Durden, the switch stance fighter of Charles Johnson. And you've got Cody Durden, who tends to start very explosively and fast and fade as the fight goes on, whereas Charles Johnson tends to be very slow to warm up into a fight, but he can build output and grow into a fight as it goes on. So as far as their records go in the UFC, very similar as well. You've got 3 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw against Chris Gutierrez for Cody Durden. And for Charles Johnson, you've got a 2-2 record, last losing that close split loss to Ode Osborne. oddly enough, it was due to basically some takedowns later in the fight as well. So, yeah, as far as they match up, I love the matchup, and I can see why it's close on the money line. Plus 135, the underdog, Cody Durden, and Charles Johnson, the minus 165 favorite here, who's had a very good record. 13 wins, 4 losses for Charles Johnson, who's never been finished. And for Cody Durden, he's been submitted a few times. I mentioned the club and sub to Muhammad Makayev being the most recent one. But other than that, to 14-4 record with 1 draw, he's never been knocked out. So, I could see this definitely going over 2.5 rounds. I could see this going to the scorecards, which is somewhere around like minus 200 for fight goes. I like that spot. That's probably the most likely outcome for this fight. Then it comes down to, I see this being a split decision, quite frankly. I might hit that prop because you're going to have the relentless takedown threat of Cody Durden. It's going to start really fast. He's going to maybe burn himself out, potentially scoring, very well in rounds 1 and rounds 2. You're going to have Charles Johnson probably taking on in the later parts of a fight, outpointing and outstriking a tired Cody Durden who might have burned himself out early. So I could see Charles Johnson dominating the second half of this fight. So I think it's going to go to the scorecards, be a mix of who had the more control time, who had the better strikes. The judges are never really unanimous on that front. So I'm going to look for the fight goes to split decision, probably play both guy by split. And since I see this being super close, I got to go with the underdog here in Cody Durden, who's looked a little bit more impressive as of late as far as his striking does look good. I mean, we saw against even Carlos Mota, who's a good striker. Cody Durden surprised him with a nice 1-2 combination, went right into the takedown threat, and was able to hold top pressure very well. So I could see that being a struggle for Charles Johnson early here. And we'll see if that gas tank does fade for Durden. But let me see him getting the better work in rounds 1 and rounds 2, and once again, edging out a very close decision win. Up next, we have the first of 2 heavyweight fights on this card. Martin Buday taking on Jake Collier is up next. And both of these guys weigh in close to the limit at 265 or 266 in the case of Martin Buday in his last fight. A fight that he won on the judges' scorecards against Lukas Brzeski. Although he probably should have lost that one, the judges must have seen some big clubbing, powerful strikes, although Martin Buday was outpointed by the metrics across 3 rounds in that fight because he chose to strike at range with another long 6'4" slick mover in Lukas Brzeski, which was against the game plan. Usually the game plan of Buday in both his pre-UFC Dana White Contender Series and his couple of UFC fights so far, at least the one against Chris Barnett, is to work the cage wrestling, get the clinch against the cage, use all of his 266 6'4" frame to wear down his opponents, pummel them against the cage, get some dirty boxing going, close elbows, damaging knees to the body and the thighs, and sometimes even before the UFC, you'd see him take get a takedown against the cage, and then have just smothering top pressure, and sometimes get the finish. He has 6 knockouts across his 11-1 record. His only loss came to former UFC fighter Juan Espino a few years ago. So not a bad loss there. He's got a pretty good record and a pretty good game plan, but last time he chose not to use that game plan. So against Jake Collier, who's been in the UFC for a while, a former middleweight and briefly light heavyweight, this guy's now going 2-4 at the heavyweight division. Just a very oversized man. Although he's 6'3", this guy certainly could cut down if he chose to. Only 34 years old, although he is the 3-year older man here. And he's coming off of a TKO loss to Chris Barnett. So, we saw the way that Martin Buday handled Chris Barnett appropriately, jammed him against the cage, broke his ribs by round 3, made him pretty much quit. Jake Collier, on the other hand, chose to slug it out with Chris Barnett last September, and then gassed himself out going for the finish, ended up on bottom of Chris Barnett, who's 5'9", and TKO'd in round 2. So pretty embarrassing performance there. Jake Collier does have some jiu-jitsu skills. When he's pacing himself, he can be kind of a slick mover, but so can Martin Buday. So I can see Martin Buday walking through Jake Collier, getting this fight to the cage where he's going to clinch up, wear out the cardio of Jake Collier, and just prove to be the bigger, more durable man. Now, if Martin Buday chooses to strike at range, Collier can pace himself over 3 rounds and land pretty good, significant strike totals. A very close split decision loss to both Carlos Felipe and Andrei Arlovski are on his heavyweight record. Fights that he was very close to winning on the judges' scorecards. But I just see Martin Buday just going back to his game plan. I'm going to chalk it up to one bad performance. And right now, Martin Buday is the underdog slightly. Minus 105 for Buday. Jake Collier minus 115. Not a fight I want anything to do with. This could be, kind of a slower decision-based victory and go over. It could be a knockout for either man that gasses out and go under. I just don't like this from a betting perspective, but I would choose Martin Buday if you had to bet on it. I think it's a pretty fair price for the bigger, more durable man. And now up next, we have the second of the two heavyweight fights on this card. Another rather sloppy one that doesn't really interest me too much from a betting perspective here. Waldo Cortes-Acosta taking on Marcos Rogerio de Lima. We've seen Rogerio de Lima in several UFC fights. He's been in the league for a long time. I want to say going back like 9 years at this point now. And he's a pretty big heavyweight with a 28-1 draw record. 37 years old at this point. His cardio has been hit or miss, but he is pretty well-rounded. The only time that he gets really exposed on a consistent basis is against grapplers that have a good submission game. They can slow him down, take him down, and then choke him out with ease. He's been submitted, I want to say, like 5 times in the UFC alone. So Waldo Cortes-Acosta is not the guy to expose that. Acosta is a boxer that we saw last year make his entrance to the UFC off the Dana White Contender Series. He scored a round 1 knockout over Danilo Suzart, and Acosta is the former LFA heavyweight champion. This guy is 9-0 with 4 knockouts, 1 submission. He is 4-0 in decisions, and he sets everything up with a nice jab. He's got good combinations. He can stalk forward and just keep on landing consistent volume over 3 rounds. Not the biggest power puncher, but he does set up combinations nicely. He's pretty durable. We saw his leg get chopped up against Jared Vanderaa in his debut. He just walked through and was able to win that decision with the better strikes, of course, to the head and body of Jared Vanderaa versus Vanderaa just racking up points with leg kicks that didn't win him on the scorecards. He went in there against Chase Sherman, I think like 3 or 4 weeks later. The legs were still intact. He showed very good durability there and, walked through Chase Sherman, landing even more strikes in that fight, but could not put Chase Sherman away. So, facing 2 of the worst heavyweights so far, Jared Vanderaa and Chase Sherman, not putting either of those 2 men away. Not a good look, but he is at least, breezing through them decisively over 3 rounds. You do like to see the cardio of these bigger guys. But Marcos, even though he's 3 inches shorter at 6'1", Marcos is probably the bigger man here, the stronger man. He's going to be the better grappler, and we've seen he's probably the more powerful man as well, just coming off of that club and sub victory of Andrei Arlovski, snapping Andrei Arlovski's 4-fight winning streak in the heavyweight division. Basically club and subbed him in that fight, knocked him down with some big, I think like a left hook up close in round 1, jumped on him, and then it only took 1 minute and 50 seconds to get that rear naked choke against the cage of Arlovski. So yeah, the times that Rogerio de Lima makes a sweat-free, bet cashing performances are like the ones against Ben Rothwell, where he just, starched him in 30 seconds with punches against the cage. The one we just saw in under 2 minutes against Arlovski. Or it's the times against, just a striker like Maurice Green, a guy who gets taken down super easily. We saw de Lima, lay and pray on him for 14 out of 15 minutes. Very boring fight, but if you had cash on Rogerio de Lima, that's a very exciting performance in that case. So heavy leg kicks, we've seen Acosta, struggle with that in fights. Heavy short-range strikes. If he gets on the inside against Cortes-Acosta, I think he could really put him away. Great submission game and powerful early. So if he could just blast Cortes-Acosta, get him thinking about the heavy strikes, take him to the mat, and then just lay and pray on the guy, maybe wear out his gas tank, he's capable of that game plan. So give me Rogerio de Lima. Unfortunately, the money line has kind of gotten away from us. He was almost a pick-em price tag at a certain point, moved to like minus 130. Now he's, let's see here. Yeah, now we're looking at a minus 180 for Rogerio de Lima, plus 155 for Cortes-Acosta. At a certain point, the money line could get so wide. If you're seeing like minus 200 for Rogerio de Lima, plus 170 or whatever for Acosta, you could really just take Acosta and just hope that the cardio fades for de Lima, as we've seen in certain fights in the past, and then Acosta comes through with that minute-winning performance with his boxing and stays on his feet over 3 rounds, wins a decision. That would be more of a possibility in that case, but just a pure prediction without the money lines involved. I think de Lima wins the fight. I think he gets one of those grappling-based performances and wins a decision that way. But I don't want to touch this at this wide money line. If it was closer to a pick'em price tag or anything under minus 150 for De Lima, maybe that's worth a bet. But either way, this is another sloppy heavyweight fight, just like the last one. I don't want to touch this at all. Could finish inside the distance. Could go all 3 rounds in a boring, quote unquote boring performance. But either way, just give me De Lima. I think he's got a more well-rounded game plan, a lot more experience. Probably the bigger, stronger man as well. Up next at featherweight, we've got a potential fight of the night candidate between Julian Erosa and our final debuting fighter on this card, Fernando Padilla. So we haven't seen Fernando Padilla, although we've heard word of his appearance in the UFC for quite some time. I think he's dealt with visa issues since he got signed to the organization. But he's fought in CFFC, the LFA, and Fury FC. And he's got a 14-4 record at 26 years old for the Mexican fighter Fernando Padilla, who's got a very good grappling skill set, but some good Muay Thai as well. He's a very good finisher. Out of 14 wins, he's got 4 knockouts and 8 submissions, going negative in decisions, though. So he's very finish or bust as far as his record is concerned right now. Julian Erosa, kind of a hit-or-miss guy as well. He can be kill or be killed. He's got 11 knockouts, 12 submissions, out of his 28 wins. But he also has, of course, he doesn't have any submission losses, but he's been knocked out 6 times, including in Erosa's last performance at the end of last year against Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres, who's one of my favorite fighters, a guy that's been in the league since 2011. And out of like 20-plus fights for Alex Caceres, that was his first knockout win. A beautiful head kick that knocked Julian Erosa out cold. So kind of concerning. The durability of Julian Erosa we always knew was in question, but when you're getting knocked out by Bruce Leroy, either Bruce Leroy was due for a knockout, but, that is another, nail in the coffin for the any confidence we have in his durability for Erosa. So 6 times he's been knocked out. Padilla does have very good Muay Thai striking weapons, good elbows, good knees up the middle as well. Julian Erosa has a very good front choke game, as well as being able to cut off the cage and have good striking weapons. So Erosa likes to get into firefights. He will chase takedowns. He will try to get the fight to the mat. And if you shoot in on him, he will wrap up a neck as well. So very dangerous guy, as is Padilla. Both of these guys, I think their jiu-jitsu is going to be at play. It's going to be on showcase here, whoever goes for the takedown. They're going to be met with some grappling, some takedown offense from the grappling front chokes. Going to be a very exciting fight. So I think this will kind of cancel itself out, stay as a striking battle. And I got to go with the underdog in Fernando Padilla, who's younger. He's been on a bit of a layoff, probably just polishing up his striking weapons. Both guys are 6'1", very long, awkwardly lanky featherweights. And I got to go with the guy who's probably got more durability and the ability to end the fight with his striking. So if we're going to call the BJJ a wash here, call that a tie, give me the guy who's got better durability, the younger man who's got a little bit more to prove as an underdog. Plus 130 on Fernando Padilla. I'm undecided if I want to put a bet on a debuting fighter coming off of a long layoff. We're starting to see that these layoffs are less and less relevant really in the success of the fighter. But either way, give me the underdog here to get an inside the distance victory, either a submission or a club and sub victory for Fernando Padilla. Middleweight bout up next between Cody Brundage and Rodolfo Viera, 2 guys that both stand at 6 foot tall at middleweights, both muscular frames, and both like to get the fight to the mat to employ their game plan. Cody Brundage, of course, the high school and collegiate wrestler with power in his hands as well. We've seen he's a potent finisher for and against, going 2-2 in the UFC so far. 3 of those fights have ended in round 1. Rodolfo Viera, very fast starter as well, looks to get the fight to the mat and employ his submission specialist game plan as the international champion in BJJ. This guy's 3-2 in the UFC at this point. And both guys coming off of losses. Cody Brundage last time out was a big underdog against Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Wrestled early, got the fight to the mat, but then got reversed and pounded out cold in round 1. Rodolfo Viera was unsuccessful to get the fight to the mat against Chris Curtis last summer, going 0 for 20 on takedowns, which, that can go towards the poor wrestling of Rodolfo Viera or just the really good movement and takedown defense of Chris Curtis. So depending on which way you look at it, probably a bit of both. But Rodolfo Viera is 8-2 as a professional. Cody Brundage 8-3. So Brundage is a very fast starter. Usually likes to get the takedowns on his terms right away. We saw him get hurt against Dolce Lungiambula and then come back and, snatch up a very tight guillotine for that come from behind, but still round one stoppage. He also, got the wrestling going early against Tresean Gore, and then just started pot-shotting from the outside, kind of blitzing one strike for one strike, but eventually landed that nice right hook and then knocked down Tresean Gore, jumped into full mount immediately and ground and pounded him out just 2 fights ago. So always a fast starter, not leaving much for the remaining parts of a fight. The only time we saw Brundage go to the decision was in his short notice debut against Nick Maximov, which he lost, getting out-wrestled, I think giving up 4 takedowns over those 3 rounds. So Rodolfo Viera, if he gets the fight to the mat on his terms, I think he's really live to either, get a sweep or a reversal from bottom position or, just get the submission if he's on top position because, Rodolfo Viera is so good at just diving onto a leg, forcing a scramble, which he comes out the victor, usually grabs onto a neck, and he's got 2 arm triangles in the UFC and 1 rear naked choke. So the only time we've seen him really struggle, aside from the Chris Curtis fight, was, of course, against Fluffy Hernandez, where he gassed out so badly he got submitted himself. So far his cardio looks okay. His striking has actually improved as well. He is very powerful up close, some vicious hooks, and some strikes that do gain his opponent's respect. And Cody Brundage, the durability is still in question, in my opinion. He did get hurt against Dolce. He did get ground and pounded very quickly out from Lord Mikal in his last fight. But overall, I just think the under 1.5 is probably the best look in this spot because if Cody Brundage wins, I think it's by round 1 finish. And Rodolfo Viera probably could end up getting that submission early as well. So without the wrestling offense being on the table for Cody Brundage safely, I got to pick Rodolfo Viera to win this fight. I think he can force a scramble, probably catch Brundage working back up to his feet, secure that rear naked choke, and that's how I see this ending in round 1. But Brundage has shown that he's probably still improving at 28, training at a good camp, and that finish potential from Brundage is still on the table as well. So I like the under 1.5, which is at a pick-em price tag, but overall I will go with Rodolfo Viera to get that round 1 submission. Up next at middleweight, we've got our co-main event of the fight card, a battle between 2 middleweights on the younger side, both in their prime, Caio Borralho versus Mikal Oleksiejczuk. So shockingly, Mikal is still the younger man here. He's 28 years old, and he's been in the UFC for quite a while now, probably about like 8 or 9 fights, having mixed success in those between light heavyweight and now moving down to middleweight in his past couple fights, where he scored back-to-back round 1 knockouts over Sam Alvey and Cody Brundage, as we talked about a couple fights back. But Caio Borralho, a little bit newer. The Brazilian is a very good grappler for the most part. He does have some good striking, but this is mostly going to be a grappler versus a striker matchup, with Mikal Oleksiejczuk being the Polish southpaw boxer, scoring 13 knockouts out of his 18 wins. The guy has done a very good job of putting away the lower level of competition he's faced at light heavyweight and now at middleweight. I think I took Cody Brundage to beat him as an underdog shot just because the odds were so wide last time. And I figured Cody Brundage could actually ground this fight because Mikal does struggle against the grapplers. Guys like OSP, guys like Jimmy Crute have both grounded him and submitted him in the past. Even Jacoby was able to have a little bit of offensive grappling success over him to win. And Cody Brundage did get the fight to the mat, but ended up on bottom and then ground and pounded very quickly by the powerful strikes of Mikal Oleksiejczuk, like we talked about a couple of fights back. So, this is going to be a spot where I think Caio Borralho is just going to be the better man. He does have good striking weapons, a pretty large middleweight is Caio, with kind of like that wide base, almost a karate in and out movement style. Doesn't choose to strike at range, but we did see on his second bout in the Contender Series how powerful his strikes are, and in some of his regional tape. But so far in the UFC, he's been very good at grounding fighters and just playing a boring decision-based victory, scoring 10 minutes of control time over Gadziev in his debut, 10 minutes of control time over Armen Petrosyan, who's very dangerous. And his last fight against Makhmud Muradov, Muradov actually chose to take him down a couple of times. Caio was actually pulling for submissions. It was more of a stressful fight than it needed to be, just because we had to wait for Caio to get reversals in rounds 2 and rounds 3, get that top position, and win a comfortable decision. But it was dicey in a few spots. He ended up on bottom for prolonged periods of time. He finds himself again now as a pretty big favorite. So Caio is going to be one of my more confident picks on this card, just because I think he will ground Mikal, stay safe early. Probably catch him over swinging with some of those boxing combinations. Take him to the mat with his good wrestling and then just grind out a control time-based decision. If not, find the submission, but lately he's been okay with, just racking up lots of control time and winning that way. And I think he does it again here against Mikal. He's a pretty sizable favorite once again, pushing past minus 300. I bet on him 2 units at minus 275, parlayed with Natan Levy. Unfortunately, that Levy and Pete Rodriguez fight has been canceled, so this is just now a 2-unit bet on the money line of Caio Borralho at minus 275. I think he's a very confident pick. When the props drop on more books, maybe you can take the gamble and look at some submission props on him, which we've been kind of chasing his past few fights, but has not come to fruition in the UFC yet. But, of course, like I said, Mikal has been submitted by a couple of opponents that were good grapplers, so maybe this will be the time he can do it, but overall the prediction is going to be Caio by decision. Okay, we made it all the way to the main event. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's break into this bantamweight 5-round potential matchup between Ricky Simón and Yadong Song. And last time we talked about this fight, I'm not sure if we even got to in the last breakdown, but the day before it was canceled, I think the money line was around minus 145 for Ricky Simón. Song Yadong was around a plus 125 underdog. The line opened up back at that price tag, but money's come in on Yadong Song, and now we've got a tighter line, minus 115 to minus 125 for Ricky Simón, right around that that even money price tag for an underdog for Yadong Song. So, people think that this is close, and it certainly is. You've got two guys that are on a very good win streak, both durable, both in their prime at the weight class. 25 years old somehow for the Chinese prospect Yadong Song, who must have started his professional career as a teenager, if that age is correct. Ricky Simón right in his prime at 30 years old. And a slight size advantage for Yadong Song, but both guys very short, stocky bantamweights, both muscular. And, the physique of is used for wrestling for Ricky Simón. All of those muscles used to just grab his opponents, take them to the mat. He's got a very tight guillotine as well. Powerful striking up close. It's improving. His defense is quite good. He leaves his body a little bit exposed and will just use his toughness to, keep pressuring forward and look for the takedown. But he's got powerful strikes. We saw that against Rafael Asuncao he knocked out. We also saw against Jack Shore in his last fight last summer. He ended the undefeated streak of Jack Shore impressively with a club and sub victory. Knocked him down with the hooks up close and then got the arm triangle when he jumped on the mat. So power in the strikes for Ricky Simón, but of course his money is made with his 6.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, over a 10-fight sample size in the UFC. Very impressive stuff for Ricky Simón, who seems to have a pretty endless gas tank in 3-round fights. This will be his first time seeing championship rounds potentially. Now, Yadong Song we saw in his last fight against Corey Sandhagen in a 5-round fight, his first headliner. That made it to the 4th round, and then due to a cut stoppage, it was cut short. But it was either 3 rounds to 1 for Corey Sandhagen, or it could have been 2-2 going into that 5th round. So Yadong Song, very powerful up close, very good striker. He tends to do more of the looping strikes, uppercuts, hooks, and things like that. Big overhands on taller opponents to make his money, more than just the traditional nice jabs and working the distance. He likes to get in close and throw bombs, but he lands with pretty good efficiency. However, in a 5-round fight, I don't see that power really extending past, the 2nd or 3rd round. I think that's really his time limit, is 15 minutes or less to get a knockout win here, which will be hard to do on Ricky Simón, who's been durable aside from that, that knockout loss to Uriah Faber where he got tagged on the temple, lost his balance, then, ground and pounded out. Other than that, Ricky Simón's been pretty solid durability-wise, but Yadong Song, you don't want to play that game with him too much. I could see Simón baiting him into a brawl up close and then quickly changing levels and going for the takedown. So, Yadong Song, that's been his kryptonite so far in his career. He has a pretty stellar record in the UFC, only losing the bout to Kyler Phillips, which was due to, the difference was made by takedowns in rounds 1 and rounds 2. He should have lost to Marlon Chito Vera. They gave him a victory that myself and a lot of others probably didn't agree with. And that was due to the difference maker being on the ground. Takedowns and grappling offense of Chito Vera should have gotten him that win. He also had a draw. Song Yadong drew with Cody Stamann. And that could have easily been a Stamen win as well. You know, Yadong Song lost a point to an illegal knee in round 1, but again, the difference was the Stamen wrestling that even made that be a draw, but I think it should have been a loss for Yadong Song. So this guy's UFC record could look different, but he is training at Team Alpha Male, shoring up that takedown defense hole. Now, if you look at the stats from his last fight for Yadong Song versus Corey Sandhagen, you're going to see a lot of failed takedown attempts from Corey Sandhagen on paper. That was a lot of just that herky-jerky movement of Corey Sandhagen where he was kind of moving laterally from side to side, switching stances, striking up top, and then kind of just showing the threat of a takedown just to make him think about the strikes that were coming his way and potentially a takedown. Those weren't like full takedown attempts where he was putting everything into it and then failing and coming up short. So it does probably look a little bit different by the metrics, the takedown defense of Yadong Song, but I do believe it's going to come a long way being as young as he is and training at Team Alpha Male. But Ricky Simón, no joke. I think his... I'm going to give him the edge in this fight, and I'm going to predict a Ricky Simón decision. And I had a bet on him last time at I believe it was minus 125. Now, generally when fights are rescheduled, I don't like betting them again, but since the line is better now at minus 115, I will put a couple of units on Ricky Simón to get the job done here. I just think that the forward pressure and aggression is going to keep Yadong Song on his back foot as the counter striker, make him use a little bit more energy he's used to using when he's the aggressor. And Ricky Simón, of course, is going to throw the takedown threat in there as well. Really keep Yadong Song thinking about that. And I could see a lot of control time being racked up from Ricky Simón, who not only is a dangerous wrestling threat for control time, it's a dangerous submission threat as well, and he's a dangerous stand-up threat. He's able to have knockout power as well that could then lead to success in his wrestling game. So I just think it's more tools in the arsenal of Ricky Simón. I think he does certainly have the motor to go 5 rounds, and I think Yadong Song is really fighting on a timer as far as his potential to win this fight. I think it has to be within those 15 minutes. Once you get in around 4, round 5, I think the arms are going to be too heavy for Yadong Song to land a knockout sequence. Although he certainly could get that job done in round 1 or round 2 most effectively. But I think Simón could take this fight down the stretch. He's been super durable, and I think he extends his 5-fight winning streak to 6 come Saturday night. Okay, there you have it, you guys. All the fights broken down for UFC Vegas 72. Yadong Song versus Ricky Simón at bantamweight. Can't wait to see which of those two prospects continues their climb towards title contention. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. Check me out on Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Central Time with my guest, Wiz Does, as we dive further through this card, predicting the fights and looking at more betting spots to add. So I'll see you guys there. Cheers.